Welcome to the Think Big Dentistry Show, where we're going to be talking about ways that you can think bigger about your life, your practice, and your purpose. I'm host Marilee Sears, joined with co-host Dr. John Gordon. We're going to be talking today about something that I think is really important, talking about the quality of the conversations, especially sometimes the conversations you don't want to have. So, Dr. John, have you ever had to have a difficult conversation?
Oh, I had one this morning when I was looking in the mirror. and I lost the conversation, Marilee. The person in the mirror beat me. And I say that with a degree of humor, but you know, the thing about the person in the mirror, and I love this topic. We've gently dabbled on this in the past, but it's such a critical component in success of any business. And with you and I helping people with their dental practices, the thing that I find when I look at people and listen to them and listen to their dreams and whatever, and I am understanding who they are, the first thing that comes to me is the ability or the inability to have those difficult, fierce, and I don't say fierce in a negative way, so I'm going to say difficult, fierce, or courageous conversations. And the more that someone is able to engage in those conversations, the greater and the more successful their practice is, bar none. So that's why I was very excited about this, and we're going to dive. I think this is probably worth 2 sessions, Marilee, really.
I will agree. I think even this whole topic is for 2021, I kind of feel like I haven't had necessarily a mantra or a theme, but something that I'm feeling come up over and over again is like, where am I too comfortable? Or where in my life or in my business or in our practice is being too comfortable not serving me, right? Like, where do I think I'm comfortable? I think I'm stable, but the truth is there's actually a decline because I've become comfortable, right?
Yes.
And so that's part of what spurred this theme and you and I talking about it. And I love how you just shifted that, Dr. John, to courageous conversations.
Correct.
Courageous conversations, because I think that's ultimately what it is. There's lots of things in our practice that it's just easier to kind of like gloss over on a day-to-day basis. And I'm probably going to really focus this conversation today a lot on practice. But the truth is it spills over into every area of our life, where we're more courageous, where we're more willing to be uncomfortable, where we're more willing to say the things that we need to say. It impacts every area of our life. And the truth is, Dr. John, I thought I was a pretty good communicator before I started working with dental offices. And you and I have had some incredible conversations. And I think, in fact, I can say you have witnessed me have some not effective communications. And luckily, you're such a good communicator. You've made up for the fact that at times I've had growth that's had to take place to be a better communicator. Because the truth is, these conversations, these courageous conversations, they take courage because they're not easy, right? And I feel like the relationships that we have in our life are a consequence or are a result of the quality of the communication that we have. And the quality of our life is a reflection of our willingness to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And be willing to move forward and to do the things that aren't always easy. And that's why, again, these conversations to me, these courageous conversations, these difficult conversations, the goal today is to help you understand where you need to have them and then how you can have them effectively so that you can get the impact that you want from it.
Yeah. This is the differentiating factor in businesses. And as dental consultants and whatever, Marilee, we can talk about all these formulas and systems and whatever until, you know, it just annoys me to sit next to people that do consulting work or to a dentist that their primary factor is cost production or production per hour per chair. And they got it wrong. They've got it so wrong. It's all relationship. And here's the formula, Marilee. is communication equals relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want an exceptional relationship, if you want to heighten the relationship, you've got to heighten your ability to communicate. So you have to be courageous.
Yes.
You have to be fierce and persistent with yourself. You have to be willing to take that difficult moment. And it's one of those things, you know, the axiom fear, you know, face everything and run, or face everything and rise. And so who we are today and who we want to be down the road is a direct component relationship between our ability to have those courageous conversations and or the conversations that we miss or fail to have due to lack of courage. So we have that moment, and this is what you were talking about, Marilee, when you sent me show notes, is that in the operatory with the hygiene, checking a patient, we come across the opportunity, and the opportunity is sitting in front of us right there to have that conversation or to pass on it. And that's a choice. And this is what became for me a moral kind of obligation, to where I'm cheating this patient out from having a better life, for me not having the courage to ask questions and have a great conversation to allow them to make the decisions based upon who they are now and what they'd like to become. And when I got over that fear, Marilee, that's when my cosmetic practice and my lifestyle dental practice just took off. And I did not have to work at it after that. It was just having great conversations with people.
That is so awesome. Dr. John, it reminds me of a quote that I read somewhere that said, we become more effective when we stop looking at how do people see us, and we start focusing on how do people see themselves and how can I help them improve how they see themselves. Right? So Dr. John, I'm telling you right now, that's going to be where we focus this conversation on the next podcast, because today I have to admit, I'm focusing more on the team and the conversations that happen there.
Yes.
Right? But I want to definitely dive more into that, because the way that you have conversations and you connect so deeply with patients, it's incredible. And you do it in just a few minutes. So that's, anyway, we hold tight for that, for the next podcast. But when we're talking about, you know, these conversations, primarily, I want to say with the team, with coworkers, with those that really on a day-to-day basis, we impact each other and we build each other up, or we tear each other down. Those are the conversations that I want to talk about. And to your point, Dr. John, of production per chair, looking at those reports and looking at those numbers, I think if we're not also looking at the culture of our practice and where we need to have better communication, better culture, better support, better communication, then we're looking at a very small portion of what makes us successful. And the other part is, I can say, you can be successful on paper without being truly successful. And I think we see that a lot in life. And what we want for everybody listening is for you to be successful on paper, but way more importantly, for you to actually be successful all the way around. And this is one of those key components that's just really, really important. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is to think back on, everyone listening, you and I will do this as well, Dr. John, but to think back on a few of those courageous conversations you had before, whether it's someone coming to you or whether it's you going to someone and having that conversation. And I hope that each of us can think of it at a time when it went really, really well.
Yeah.
Right. Where a relationship was strengthened because of a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the times that I can tell you that have come to my mind, there was like a rocky part of the conversation, right? Like it could go either way, but ultimately we had a unified goal. Ultimately, we had deep respect for each other. Ultimately, we wanted this relationship, whether it's a working relationship or a personal relationship, to be strong. And so what happened through that conversation was something that ultimately deeply strengthened it.
Yeah.
And that's what I want for these conversations that are happening in your practice.
Right.
And so I think first is taking that time to think, when is the last time that I actually had one of these conversations? Because
Yeah.
the truth is, they shouldn't be like these milestone moments that happen once every 5 years. As Dr. John just shared, really impactful conversations should be happening at least on a weekly basis. Really, they should be happening almost on a daily basis.
Yes.
So, but that means intention. There has to be intention, and that you have to be aware of the areas where you want to see improvement, and then also be honest about the areas where you could do better or others could do better. And part of the reason I brought this up, Dr. John, is as we're working with dentists and as we're working with teams, I think one of the most common complaints that we hear is complaints about the level of the relationship, right? The dentist saying something like, I really have incredible patients. I have incredible team members. I don't know if they're totally invested in the practice.
Yeah.
Now, that's something that we hear pretty often. And then when we're talking to the team members, we hear something like, you know what, he's a really good doctor, but sometimes I feel like we're focusing too much on the business, or I don't like it when we talk too much about the money. The truth is, the team wants to have these conversations. They want to be part of the vision and growth of the practice.
Absolutely.
Right? The difference is they don't want to be told what to do. They want to be part of the solution.
Yes. The one thing, Marilee, to ensure more success, the number one thing to ensure more success for staff or employee buy-in is to allow them, make yourself vulnerable enough to allow them to be in part of the decision-making process in the systems and the end goals. When they do that, they buy in because they feel like they're listened to, they're important, and people care about them. And this is what I did with my staff when we did monthly goals for our production. Now, we're talking about production per hour, per chair, whatever. I never really did that, but we did a monthly production goal. And we did a monthly collection goal. And so we did a monthly, this is going to sound a little funny, diagnostic goal. And the reason I threw diagnosis in is because that tests our courageous conversations, commitment. If you're not committed to courageous conversations, you're not going to be diagnosing.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other important factor was the percentage of sale of that diagnosis. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And so those were the things that I looked at. Those are the 4 things that I kept track of all the time. Sorry, Marilee. Those are the things I kept track of all the time in my practice that were really of importance.
Yes.
Because those, I felt those were the big ones. And the thing about the production and the collection per day and monthly goal,
Mm-hmm.
if my staff would set them higher than I would have.
That's when you have an incredible team. And we've seen that with teams as well, Dr. John. The doctor's like, okay, this is what I want the production goal to be. And we're like, okay, just hold that thought. Let's let the team talk. And isn't it awesome when the team actually is like, I think we can do this. And the doctor's mouth kind of drops open because it's a bigger vision than the doctor actually had.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That is absolutely awesome. So whether we're talking about production or whether we are talking about maybe an actual problem, something that we want to address in the office, I have this diagram that I'm going to try to explain. A friend of mine shared it with me, and I felt like it just was like mind blown. Like my conversations ever since have been different. So usually if there's so let's say that there's an issue that we want to address, and I'm talking with you, Dr. John, like there's an issue that I want to resolve, and it's talking to you. It's kind of like you hold your opinion, I hold my opinion, and now we're kind of like this arrow going back and forth where there's like this discussion back and forth, but there's almost like this conflict back and forth.
Have I been naughty? Is that why we need to have a conversation? Have I been naughty?
Dr. John, we're gonna wait until we're off air to have that conversation.
come back next week and I'll tell you what happened. Just checking in early.
No, you're in the clear. I promise, Dr. John, you're in the clear. And so, but if we can instead talk about whether it is production, whether it's the fact that we're having a high rate of canceled appointments, whether it's the fact that we have a low treatment acceptance rate, whatever it is that we need to discuss, rather than making that problem like a discussion that goes back and forth, it's really worthwhile to almost make that problem a third person. So now Dr. John and I are both looking at that problem from a place of like, we can bring solutions versus I'm looking at Dr. John as though he's the problem. He's looking at me as though I'm the problem. Instead, we can say, hey, this is the problem. This is what I'm concerned about. Let's talk about ways that we can deal with it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I hope that makes sense. Instead of looking at each other and having the discussion be like a two-way thing, and with us both looking at each other, it makes sense to whatever the conflict is or whatever the goal is. Instead, we want to actually make that like the third person and be looking at that as a separate identity, a separate issue, so that we can really both bring all of ourselves to the solution instead of feeling like we also have to defend ourselves as well.
Exactly. And that's a very important point. There's, I look at 5 characteristics of a great, courageous conversation. Number 1 is that you both enter into that conversation with a degree of passion for a great outcome. Secondly is that you respect the integrity of the other person that you're having the conversation with. Then thirdly is that you are open to the other person being honest and lower your defenses. Then you also, you be yourself, you be authentic. Don't try to be anybody else other than who you are, and look at it as also the final one as just the ultimate togetherness collaboration. And when you throw those components in there, you look at the conversation differently. You take away that adversarialism, and then you become advocates. And so that's the way, is that we just have to shift our mental thinking when we go into too often, Marilee, we go in, we go in, I'll say this, Dr. John, I think too often we go in with that mentality of like principal, student, parent, principal, student, teacher, student, parent, child. And the truth is, it's really important. And again, why I like that image of let's be equals and let's talk about the problem versus you're the problem. Yeah. Right. The truth is, we can actually believe that this employee is a problem, but instead of talking about the employee being the problem, we want to talk about the problems that we're seeing and not make it about the employee. And I feel like in order to have these courageous conversations be really, really impactful and meaningful, just to add on to what you're saying, Dr. John, there's a few boundaries or a few guidelines that I'd like to provide that I think have helped tremendously to help my conversations and the conversations with dentists that we've worked with to be more effective with their team members. The first is, when you're having these conversations, again, we're focusing primarily on team, on those working relationships in this conversation and in this podcast. The first is to actually have a time and a space for it. I think it's best when it is actually planned out. It doesn't mean that that has to be 2 weeks in advance, but having that conversation because you're upset or because you see something and having it being a knee-jerk reaction to have that conversation, I would say it's not the best time. I think it's better to say, I'm going to talk to this person. You can even address and say, I saw something today that I'm unhappy with. I saw something today that concerned me. That's probably how I would say it. I saw something today that concerned me, or I heard something today that concerned me. I'd like for us to talk about it tomorrow. I think it's worthwhile to address the issue, but to actually have the conversation in a time and a space when it's going to be the most productive. And generally that means not right there in that moment if we're upset or if we haven't had time to think through. This is the other important part. What's the ideal outcome? Right? Like, what is the ideal outcome that we want? Because if our only ideal outcome is to express our displeasure or to express our concern, that's our only outcome, is to get it off of our chest, that's actually not going to make for a very productive meeting. So the first thing I'd say is you need to have a time and a space. The second part is you need to have a clear outcome, which also means you need to have clear guidelines for those conversations. Because another place that I've seen it, and Dr. John, I know you've witnessed it as well, is if we don't have clear guidelines,
the conversation, forgive me, I'm just going to say it, becomes a shit show. Like
Yeah.
everybody starts bringing every single complaint that they can think of into the mix, when the truth is, I have a concern about the level of missed appointments that we're having. I want to have a discussion about that so that we can come up with solutions. Would you let's do that on Friday at 2:00? Okay. I'd love for you to bring your best solutions, your ideas, and we can talk about how we can address this. That's
Yeah.
how you make it not about the other person. That's not how you say, I'm concerned about you not doing your job well. Or they realize that you want to talk about what the problem is and that you see them as part of the solution. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might also see them as part of the problem. It's true. But the truth is, you're going to come into the conversation with saying, I want you to bring the solution. I want you to help me address this concern that I'm seeing so that we can find a good resolution. We can find some good solutions. So define the time, define the container, I guess I'll say, and then define that outcome that you want and have those guidelines of what this conversation is and also what it isn't. So that means at times if a team member says something like, you know what, last year you promised me a raise and we still haven't had that raise. It's like, okay, then let's set a time to have that conversation, because this conversation is about the missed appointments that I'm seeing, and I want to make sure we get a good resolution to that problem. So being really clear on what that outcome is, like what the basis of that conversation is. And then I think the third part is really just being intentional of this being an ongoing thing. I'll say it again. I think we're working with dentists who have been in practice for 5 years or 35 years. It's not uncommon for there to be conversations that need to take place that should have taken place 10 years ago.
Right.
And it's always better to just, it's okay if it should have happened 10 years ago. We can move forward from here. But I think it's something that courageous conversations, difficult conversations shouldn't be something that happens a handful of times in your career. It should be something that happens frequently, because that's the only way that we continue to bond and grow and progress together and deepen those relationships with each other. And when we have deep, meaningful relationships with our team, it becomes so much easier for each of us to have deep and meaningful conversations with our patients. And that's why we're going to talk about that more next time. But that's just what I would challenge everybody that's watching and listening today, is to evaluate, how am I doing when it comes to courageous conversations? Where do I have team members that I need to speak with because I feel like they potentially don't support the vision of the practice or the culture that we want to have in the practice by either the actions that you see or the attitude that they have? And then the other question is, and who are the team members that I feel like are really excelling in the culture that they provide, the way that they show up, the attitude and skills that they bring? Because both of those are courageous conversations, both addressing the things that we want to improve and also addressing the things that we see going so well are courageous conversations.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of work in dentistry to have both of those conversations. And so that's something I hope we see more of. So that's my homework assignment to everyone listening. And then also, Dr. John, you and I are going to hold each other accountable to this, of, where in our life can we have one courageous conversation in these next 2 weeks, so that we can start to have this momentum that impacts our practice and allows us to have deeper, more meaningful conversations with our team and with our patients.
Yeah. And I want them to think about this one thing, Marilee, in this time frame between now and then, is that just know that you are where you are today because of the conversations you have had or the conversations that you have failed or missed having. So there we go.
That's it.
That's it.
Get to work. We're going to get on it. We're taking on this assignment as well, Dr. John. So we can't wait to continue the conversation. This one's not the difficult one, right? No, I'm kidding. We'll continue this podcast conversation.